Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another seminar for the cell therapy program. We're very excited uh, for today's talk, actually. And this brings me to introducing Dr. Leigh Turner. Leigh is the executive director of the Bioethics program and member of the Stem Cell Research Center and professor of health, society, and behavior at the University of California, Irvine. And I can say that Leigh is really one of the pioneer bioethicists who shed light on a very critical and important topic, which is the selling of unlicensed and untested, unproven stem cell interventions. And this brings me to the title of the talk today, which is the American Stem Cell Ethical Issues Related to US Businesses Selling Unproven and Unlicensed Stem Cell Interventions. Leigh, thanks so much for joining us today. We are very excited to hear your talk, and it's all yours. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And more importantly, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be part of your conversation. I think as you know, Mohammed, I'm a USC graduate, and it's been a long time since I was there, but it's great to be back and be part of your conversation, be part of your community, at least for this afternoon. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this seminar series. As you said, I'm going to be focusing on sort of the U.S. part of a much larger global marketplace, businesses that are involved in selling stem cell interventions, making fairly bombastic claims about them without necessarily doing much or any research in support of the kinds of claims that they're making. There's a history here, and I think many of you are probably aware of that history. If we were to, go back in time and have this kind of conversation or presentation around 2002, 2004, 2008, we would probably be talking much more in terms of what was often described as stem cell tourism. The idea being that if someone in the United States or Canada or Australia or England and a number of other countries was seeking access to a purported stem cell therapy, they, at that time, they probably weren't getting it within the boundaries of their own country. A lot of the news media coverage from that time and the earlier academic studies I'll show you in just a minute. What they found, it was instances of individuals, getting on planes, traveling to clinics in places like China, India, Mexico, Russia, Thailand, Ukraine, Panama, and sometimes it was found, and going elsewhere for these interventions. Sometimes it was adults, sometimes it was parents taking children, but it had this transnational cross-border aspect to it. And that's kind of where we have that earlier rhetoric or narrative of stem cell tourism. And even today, you can find a lot of academic organizations where when they're thinking about markets for stem cell products that haven't gone through careful review, preclinical research, clinical trials, they'll often use reference to stem cell tourism. But I just want to emphasize very quickly here that we need to understand that sometimes now it's more a matter of a drive across town or a walk down the street. So that's kind of where things have changed. What kind of prompted this activity? Well, there are a lot of factors taking place, but I think part of the story is that when you have a global marketplace, it's not as though there are one set of laws and regulations that dominate in the world. In fact, we have different markets, different countries with different laws and regulations. They'll have their own histories. They'll have their own traditions. Sometimes they interpret values in different ways. And there are also sometimes different, scandals and tragedies that may or may make for, stricter or comparatively lax, to use that term, regulations. And that could be applicable to human subject research. It could be applicable to stem cell products. But when you look around the world, 20 years ago and today, there's considerable variation when it comes to the regulation of stem cell-based interventions and other products. Just to give you a flavor of the work from that time, Tim Caulfield's group and his co-authors published a piece in Cell Stem Cell that was really quite influential. This is from a data set that was from August 2007. And when they did a kind of a global analysis looking at businesses that were making online representations about purported stem cell treatments, they found they were able to track down websites for 19 businesses that were marketing these kinds of purported products at 23 distinct clinics. So you end up with these discrepancies, and we kind of track this today. You can have businesses, and one business may be one clinic, one business might be a couple of clinics. That's why there's discrepancies between businesses and clinics. And what they found was that, some of the leaders included Mexico, China, India, Philippines, Russia, Thailand, and then other places that had a kind of a sprinkling. You could find a business and a clinic there, not more than that. And there are places like the United States and Canada that this list from 2018, they're not on that list. But fast forward about less than a decade later, another research group, including Doug Sipp, a well-known contributor to this field, made all kinds of really crucial contributions, and John Rasko and their research team, they did this really kind of quite comprehensive study looking at online representations from businesses, clinics around the world. And they ended up finding 417 unique websites that were marketing purported stem cell products provided at clinics in 52 different countries. And that column to the right there has, they've got so much data, it's hard to do, even just do anything more than scratch the surface. But I just kind of picked out their top 10 list of countries by number of clinics. And it's interesting that, India and Mexico and China are still up there, but there's some new players that they found, including the United States, Australia, United Kingdom, Germany had expanded as well, giving a sense that activity in this global marketplace had changed. There were new players, there were new concentrations of clinics, and I'm going to talk more about the US side of all this in just a few minutes. What's the context here, both in terms of this global marketplace that I've mentioned, as well as the US activity? Part of it, I think, is there's a legal story to this, and I've already alluded to it, that there are these national variations in legal frameworks. So we may talk about, the morality, the ethical standing of particular stem cell products, but there may be some countries where those are advertised in a legal way, or at least not an openly illegal, non-compliant manner. Sometimes there are these regulatory gaps in gray zones where you can have non-existent laws, vague laws, conflicting laws, little loopholes, porous spaces that provide some businesses, entrepreneurial types, this spot that they can occupy and set up a clinic and regulate products that are kind of ambiguous in terms of their legality. Another practice that sometimes occurs is that countries can have, not just kind of like accidental loopholes, but deliberate regulatory exceptions where a fair bit of thought has gone into them. The United States, for example, has something called the same surgical procedure exception, where you can move fat around from one part of the body to another, or a vein from one part of the body to another. You can't process it highly, you can't do a lot to it, but you can sort of move things around. That's not an accidental exception, it's an intended exception. But sometimes what happens is you'll have laws and regulations that have these sort of special carve-outs, and then you can have a marketplace where people will kind of take those exceptions and elbow an even larger space and kind of exploit them beyond the way in which they were intended by regulators. It's especially, kind of easy to set up clinics involved in marketing products where stem cell interventions aren't subjected to standards that govern clinical research, human subject research on regulated medical products like, drugs, biologics, medical devices. If something is classified as a medical procedure, for example, the bar to providing that medical procedure may be much lower than, say, bringing a drug into the marketplace. And likewise, if it's a country that doesn't require provision of convincing evidence of safety and efficacy, where you have to do preclinical research, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies, go to a national regulator, submit all of your safety and efficacy data, make a convincing case that you've got compelling safety and efficacy data and obtain licensure. If you don't have to do all of that, if you can just call it a medical intervention or a surgical procedure, then you may end up occupying a kind of a surgical innovation space where you can jump in there and start doing things without anyone paying an awful lot of attention to what you're up to. even when there are laws on the books, one possibility is that if there are laws that sometimes constrain and prohibit activities like marketing a purported stem cell product for Alzheimer's disease or ALS, if if a regulatory body conducts an investigation and then finds that a particular business is non-compliant, if that finding of non-compliance basically consists of a warning letter or some other, a letter, but not really any more robust action, some people may actually decide that if that's all that they're going to get, a regulatory slap on the wrist, they don't care. Now, if it's USC or UC Irvine or a lot of other entities, they do care, because a warning letter from the FDA, for example, would be quite a consequential thing to experience. All kinds of things would have to happen. The facilities would have to come into compliance. It would be a kind of a public relations debacle. There would be consequences. But if you've just operating a business and you put out a shingle on the internet and you're making various claims and someone shuts you down, shutting down might just be a matter of you pull down your website, you wait a month, and then pop up a new website and carry on again. And if you've made $3 million or the equivalent in some other country and you've got a letter, you might decide, I'm going to make another $3 million. And if they send me another letter, that's okay. I'm not going to worry about it very much. So that's what I mean about how, certain kinds of regulatory responses can actually incentivize non-compliant activity, because people can look and say, this is a great opportunity for profit making, for profit seeking, and the odds of anything consequential happening to me are actually pretty low. So I'm just going to go out there, and this is going to be a lucrative business opportunity, in part because there's an endless supply of people who are ill and injured and suffering and seeking relief for their pain and looking for assistance of some kind. And that's something else that I think is something else that we need to think about when we explore this marketplace, that it's not just a matter of variations in regulations around the world. It's not just a matter of regulatory loopholes or regulatory brokerage. There are a lot of other factors at play that we can at least briefly touch on here today. Part of it is when you think about a clientele, there are a lot of individuals who have serious health issues. They may have a fatal disease, a life-threatening disease, a degenerative disease, chronic disease, may just experience a fair degree of pain that isn't effectively treated with existing interventions. All of those individuals can potentially go online, find a business that says that makes claims that speak to that person, and start to think about the possibility of going to that business. And that can be true whether the facility is in the United States or some other country. Another background factor, and I think this is where those of us who are at academic institutions kind of belong to entities that are part of this larger problem. We're not at particular businesses, but are sometimes contributors to hyperbole. This, I think, is something else that the stem cell field has been one where there are a lot of encouraging findings, a lot of encouraging results, the development of some meaningful therapies, but also a lot of hyperbole and a lot of promissory rhetoric. And that can be helpful if you're trying to, get your grant applications funded, if you're trying to get your work placed in elite academic journals. But it's also something that other people may end up running with to make it seem as though investigational products are ready for prime time and can effectively be marketed today. Even though when serious researchers look at the existing data, they may think, well, it's encouraging, but by encouraging, they mean there's a case to be made for moving into human beings for the first time, or for moving from a phase 1 study to a larger phase 2 study. That's what encouraging means. It doesn't mean setting up shop and selling it right now. There also have been advances in what we could characterize as legitimate stem cell research, and I think that can have the effect of sometimes making people think that, well, we've got effective stem cell therapies already for Alzheimer's disease, dementia, Parkinson's disease. When you look at the literature on patients and individuals' perceptions of kind of the state of therapy, many people will kind of not really understand the limited interventions available now and think that we're kind of like at a moment where we already have stem cell therapies or other kinds of interventions for diseases where that's really not the case. Another factor here is that when you look at the websites of the kind of businesses I'm going to talk about in more detail, when you look at empirical studies about these businesses again and again, the dominant motif as you find is researchers, finding that these businesses, they use misrepresentations to market these purported stem cell interventions. And so this is, kind of persuasive, compelling activity, and it's not bound by very careful, circumspect, descriptions of sort of really detailed characterizations of risks and benefits that might lead people to make very different decisions. Then there's the global reach of digital advertising. It's possible to put up a website. You can be sitting in in Los Angeles, you can be sitting in Panama, put up a compelling website and reach people from around the world. And I think that's something, kind of a larger story here about the emergence of the internet and online advertising, and the way in which what might have once been a kind of a local business, maybe you put up billboards or put out newspaper ads, now you can reach people all over the place. And if you're using, dishonest, misleading advertisements, but then there's a global clientele that may be pulled in by those claims. And then another factor here, as I said, is that, I think there is this kind of profiteering aspect to this, that it's difficult to really develop safe and efficacious therapies, stem cells or otherwise, for a long list of diseases and injuries. That's a really challenging undertaking. You need a lot of expertise, you need financial resources, you need time, because it takes a lot of time to develop effective therapies. You need to persuade regulators. There are many challenges to conducting really rigorous, thorough research. And even if you do all of it well, if you move through preclinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, spent all that time, used all those resources to get to phase 3, you may end up finding that maybe you've got a product that is, fairly safe, but isn't efficacious. And so when you go that route, there may be no profits at the end of it. Whereas again, if you just put out a shingle on the internet, you can sometimes, maybe you pay for a few minimal devices in your clinic, and then you start advertising, and money begins rolling right away, without all of the expenses and labor that go along with conducting, rigorous translational research. And so I think that's a piece of this larger marketplace. I'm going to talk now about the US piece of this global marketplace. There's a lot more that I could probably say that is, than each slide, but I just want to emphasize that I'm talking about businesses here in the United States where, they don't have FDA approved products that they're advertising. They're selling purported stem cell interventions that aren't backed from convincing safety and efficacy data from controlled clinical trials. I know we could talk a lot more about, what does convincing mean, or even what does evidence mean, and what kind of trials are we talking about? So we can come back to this later in the discussion if you're interested. I'm going to be referring to businesses that there's no public record indicating that they're conducting FDA cleared investigational new drug applications. And what they're selling falls outside what, I think we could fairly describe as the current standard of care in neurology, immunology, other fields. So some earlier work that I did on this topic with Paul Knopfler, also in the UC system at UC Davis. We did a study of the US marketplace. And at that time, back in 2016, we locked in our database at the end of February 2016. We found 351 US businesses that were operating 570 clinics selling purported stem cell treatments. And so again, just to be clear, a business like, a healthcare facility like MD Anderson that's doing, stem cell transplants for individuals with cancer, they're not in this database. This was not an attempt to track down, cancer facilities, institutions treating cancers of the blood, or other, other kinds of interventions. This is outside that evidence-based kind of stem cell interventions, and again, outside the realm of FDA-approved stem cell products. And there are, I think around 22 in the cell and gene therapy-based category right now. Now, to me, while working on this study, it became clear. I mean, as this database got built, I didn't know at the beginning. I mean, I kind of thought of this as this is a project, there's a finish line, eventually you can't find them. And I was really struck by it. Just sort of seemed like this seemed like a project that was just never going to end. And in the end, it ended up being more or less locked in by time, that we brought it to a halt. But it wasn't long after that it was possible to continue finding these businesses. So I kind of think of this now as the numbers seemed jarring and eye-popping and really unexpected at the time. And now I think this was, I assume it was an undercount of what could actually be found in 2016. So I think this needs, this should make it clear to us that when we're thinking about where people go to get stem cell interventions, we can't just think of this as a story of people crossing the border into Mexico or going to China or, or India or other destinations. Whether you think of it in positive terms or critical terms, we have a pretty large direct-to-consumer marketplace here in the United States. And in fact, the available data, just by sheer numbers, would suggest that we have more such businesses and clinics in the United States than anywhere else. Now, part of it might be that it all depends on how much time you want to put into this. I mean, maybe if someone had the time and resources, I don't know what they would find if they did a really exhaustive look in some other countries. But we don't have that kind of fine-grained, granular analysis everywhere around the world. So if you look at the existing studies, the United States really seems to be out in front. And maybe that picture will change over time as more of these studies are done. Well, what about today? I can't tell you what this marketplace looks like today, but I can tell you that fairly recently, I did another kind of study that was about 5 years later from that 2016 one, heading into last March 2021. Similar research methods. I will say that, after you've done this kind of work and have a database and can refine your methods, it does get a little bit easier. You kind of learn some more ways of finding these. So it's not strictly comparable data, but in the end ended up finding 1,480 US businesses operating 2,754 clinics. So in other words, just as a kind of cognitive shorthand, around 1,500 businesses and around 3,000 clinics. I think by any standard, that's a lot of businesses and clinics that are in this direct-to-consumer marketplace. There's an awful lot happening out there. Now, what's happened in the last year? The FDA did, state their intention. This period of enforcement discretion that they had was over. The FDA is supposed to increasing its oversight of this marketplace. And, I know that from continuing to monitor this database, there are businesses that have disappeared from the marketplace or are no longer marketing stem cells. Now, if that's all that you focus on, it looks as though the marketplace is shrinking. But over this time, post-enforcement discretion, there are also new businesses and new clinics entering the marketplace. I don't know what the final tally is for today, but what I can say is this is a fairly fluid marketplace. Businesses and clinics come and go. And I can't tell you exactly today whether the numbers have gone up and down, but at least we have a sense of, a year ago where we were at. What does it look like across the United States? Well, California is out in front in terms of number of clinics, with 347 of them a year ago. Florida next at 333, Texas at 310. I think of those as the big three when it comes to the United States. Studies that I was involved in, the 2016 one, 2018 one, that 2021, those three states always popped up as the place where these kinds of clinics really clustered. That's probably an interesting story in its own right. Beyond the top three, there are some other places. Arizona and Colorado used to be in that next category, right after spots 4 and 5. Now there's this other category that I placed in red of states that have over 100 clinics making direct-to-consumer claims about stem cell products in the United States: Arizona, New Jersey, New York, Colorado, Illinois, Georgia, Ohio, and then an additional 8 states with over 50 clinics. Now, there are some individuals that will look at this and say, well, it tells you something about clinics, but this is also, mostly this is a story about how the United States is populated, that California, Florida, and Texas, they're big states, they've got a lot of people in them. And that's true. But when you move beyond those top three, that story of it's just a sort of a story of population starts to break down. It's not strictly a matter of population. There do seem to be some other factors in play, and we can guess about what those could be. I mean, maybe it's not just how many people are in a state. Maybe it's also a matter of the population demographics. Do you have middle class individuals? Do they concentrate in cities? Are they elderly and with a number of comorbidities, a lot of health issues? Maybe medical boards make a difference. Do the medical boards kind of struggle to oversee a variety of healthcare marketplaces? So we have data in terms of clinics in different locations. It's a more challenging story to figure out, why is it that we see this kind of clustering in different places? It's not the easiest story to tell.
Leigh, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
I think the slide got frozen.
Oh, are they?
Oh, now it's working. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry. If it does seem to be frozen, let me know, and I'll see what I can do here.
Sure.
Okay. So what kind of claims are they making? What kinds of stem cell products are they purporting to sell? Well, there are kind of the most common representations that are made, and that's typically autologous bone marrow derived stem cell interventions or autologous adipose derived. There are others that will advertise autologous peripheral blood products. There's a new category not spotted in that 2016 piece, and that's around 99 businesses that are now marketing exosome products. And then there's this other category which appears to be increasing, and that these are clinics that will advertise allogeneic birth tissue derived stem cell based interventions. So these are the places that are advertising, amniotic stem cell therapies, or umbilical cord derived stem cell therapies, or placenta derived stem cell therapies. And when you add them all up, they're a meaningful part of this marketplace as well. And that's where, if you have a chiropractor's office or you have a podiatrist or a naturopath and they're marketing stem cell therapy, this may be a kind of an off-the-shelf product that they're purchasing it from a supplier, they're placing an order online. That product is being shipped to their office. They may be getting something that it doesn't say, it doesn't say stem cells on it. It's not advertised by the supplier as a stem cell treatment, but then on the direct consumer basis at that clinic, it gets advertised as a stem cell therapy. And there's been some work that I'm not going to get into detail here. People have tested those products and not found, live, viable, functional stem cells. It's a product of some kind, but there's the marketing rhetoric, and then there's like sort of what's actually in them, and it's not live, viable, functional stem cells. What kind of representations do they make? Well, there are businesses that, out in front, claims that make assertions about relieving pain, orthopedic disorders, diseases and injuries, sports medicine. And then there's this other category of over 100 businesses that will make claims in terms of using stem cells to treat a variety of neurological diseases. And then other clinics, cosmetic, immunological, hair loss, lung respiratory, and it goes on from there. So I think what this does is it gives a sense of there are certain marketing claims that really kind of dominate this marketplace. And then there's this also, when you look across the bottom there's really kind of some real breadth in terms of the variety of representations that businesses in the United States will make about, what exactly they're purporting to treat at their facilities. The marketplace itself, it's common for people to talk about stem cell clinics. And if you actually look and see, well, what about these businesses themselves? I mean, how do they brand themselves to prospective clients? Out in front, yes, there is a subset of them that do call themselves stem cell clinics or stem cell and regenerative medicine clinics, but there are a lot of other businesses out there. And as you can see from the numbers up top, a lot of pain clinics, ortho clinics, integrative medicine clinics, podiatry clinics, chiropractor clinics, spine clinics, wellness, cosmetic spa, and it kind of goes on from there. There are a lot of different kinds of businesses that are in this marketplace that will advertise purported stem cell treatments. And, you can find acupuncture clinics that will advertise stem cell therapies. You can find vein clinics. You can find erectile dysfunction clinics. I mean, there's a lot of kind of, weird and wacky things that are out there, a lot more variety than you might think. Now, I've said a little bit about the kinds of advertising representations that get made, and I want to just kind of step back a little bit here and kind of ask does it matter? Why should we care? Does it really have any impact kind of question? I think the answer is that it's yes, that there are some really serious consequences that can flow from having a marketplace like this. Probably the most alarming one, and maybe the one that tends to get the most news media coverage, is that people can be badly harmed when they go to facilities like this, that however reassuring the marketing claims, however promissory the rhetoric is, however persuasive it is, there are individuals who've gone to these facilities and suffered really serious consequential harms as a result of having these purported stem cell interventions. The piece that I have put up here, the New England Journal of Medicine piece, it's a fairly well-known one. It got a lot of news media coverage. It summarizes cases of three individuals, 3 women who were suffering from vision loss. They went to a clinic in Florida, had what they thought were stem cell treatments, autologous stem cell treatments that were going to help them. And they ended up suffering severe vision loss or outright blindness as a result of having these interventions. Now, this is a business that has, a number of things have happened with that business. It got a warning letter. It became the subject of a permanent injunction. It's become the subject of multiple lawsuits. But these individuals went there thinking that they were going to a clinic that was going to help them out, and a very different outcome. Sometimes it's not, the problems don't necessarily occur just at the clinic. Sometimes problems go back to suppliers, manufacturers, biobanks, tissue banks, cord blood banks. This is a piece from JAMA Network Open that it basically involved an investigation where it was conducted in multiple states. It involved multiple clinics that found 20 individuals who had ended up suffering bacterial infections because they were administered contaminated umbilical cord blood derived stem cell based interventions. So again, they thought they were getting stem cell treatments, to relieve pain, for orthopedic indications, for other indications. They ended up being administered contaminated products and being hospitalized, having quite serious consequences as a result of going to places that they thought were going to help them. Mohammed, I know you've contributed to scholarship in this area, and I wanted to just point out that there have been some attempts to, a lot of the contributions in these areas, it's case studies, it's case reports, it's case series, where we maybe learn a bit about a person, an individual or a couple of individuals. There have been some efforts to try and look beyond and summarize and look across those. And this is a good example of one where there were 35 case reports that were identified. And I just want to point out that this is not strictly about the US marketplace, but 11 of these individuals were from the United States. That was the country they embarked from. And 6 of them were attributable to US clinics. So even in a piece here that had a more global orientation, the US popped up as a place where people were going and sometimes being harmed by these interventions. Liz Richardson, and Frazanakis and others at Pew have also done work in this area. They've done a report. And so if those of you who are interested, this is another piece that has tried to kind of scan the landscape and look into case reports and case series. They too found quite a number of individuals who've been harmed as a result of entering into these direct-to-consumer marketplaces. They also make the important point that there appears to be substantial underreporting. And this is not shocking because it's not the businesses themselves that are disclosing these complications. It's people who are basically treating individuals who are coming in with serious complications, seeking relief, seeking help of some kind. So it may be that the case reports and case series that we're getting could be a kind of a tip of the iceberg sort of phenomenon. Now, it's probably not just the stem cell products themselves that are at issue here. It's probably also the qualifications, the training, the credentials, and the expertise or lack of expertise of many of the individuals at these facilities. This is a piece I'm not going to get into detail, but Zubin Master and I and several of his colleagues at the Mayo Clinic tried to look into who works at these businesses, who operates them, who staffs them. In the ortho space, it's common to have people who do have an ortho background, so that maybe they're offering orthopedic stem cell interventions, they have a background in orthopedic surgery, but when you go beyond the ortho space, that relationship between advertised interventions and training really starts to break down. And I think that could be a contributing factor, a risk in terms of not just the product, but the lack of expertise of the individuals. Now, another factor, so that's a bit about, what's one harm? It's people being physically injured at these facilities. Another kind of harm has to do with the misrepresentations and the way in which those compromise and undermine informed decision-making. So when people are being given, a very powerful story about the benefits of a product and very little is said about the risks, that's going to affect people's decision-making. That can come up in terms of generalized information pumped out on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, but it can also come up in the conversations that people have when they think about having an intervention. In particular, these kinds of misleading representations tend to take place in the seminars, the educational events, the sales pitches that these businesses put on, where again, it's often these quite aggressive sales tactics that are used that compromise rather than enable informed decision-making. Well, what kind of techniques do they use? Part of it is these businesses, they're good at what they do. They're good at closing the deal. They're good at persuading people that they've got safe and efficacious products that are ready to go right now. They'll use scientific seeming advertising claims. They'll take research being done by credible researchers at academic institutions, for example, and they'll make it seem as though a preclinical study or a phase 1 study backs what they're doing at their facility. It's very common to see these facilities, these clinics take advantage of testimonials. They'll use a local celebrity or maybe a former NFL player or Major League Baseball player, have them do a testimonial, put that up on YouTube. And there's a kind of before or after story of this is what I was experiencing. I went to this clinic, I had the stem cell treatment. Now I can play tennis and do all these things. These are very powerful. From a scientific perspective, they may be of really no significance. But in terms of emotional persuasive power, they can be quite influential. Some of these businesses have cobbled together, what I think of as not really credible scientific research, but they'll cobble together a study of some kind. They'll put it on clinicaltrials.gov, and it's only when you call the facility and start asking some questions that you find out that it costs $20,000 or $8,000 to be in this so-called study that has not been, cleared by the FDA in any way, but may or may not have IRB approval. And there are some other steps that businesses can use to, but this is the basic idea is, as Doug Sips suggests, is to use these tokens of legitimacy, these tokens of credibility to convince people that what's being offered are stem cell products that, they will help people, they're safe, they will help people now. And then there are these hard sales tactics where it's not just misleading marketing representations, it's also the way in which businesses will really kind of exploit the hope, the desperation, the suffering, the vulnerability of individuals. So I think that's something else, that it's not just, I said, as a sales pitch, it's who that sales pitch targets that's problematic. I'll just add that when we talk about misrepresentations, it's very common to think about, the harm having to do with individual patients, but I actually think, in the aggregate, when you have rampant misinformation or disinformation pumped out by several thousand clinics across the national marketplace, you can actually have this kind of collective problem where, as a society, we have this kind of enormous amount of misinformation circulating about the current state of stem cell research, the current state of stem cell therapies. And I think this can really kind of create a lot of problems where just the public in general may have a really difficult time making meaningful distinctions between or among, FDA approved stem cell and regenerative medicine products, not FDA approved, but evidence-based stem cell therapies, investigational products where there's enough data to move them into clinical trials involving human research participants, but they're not approved therapies. And then there's other category of products that lack convincing evidence of safety and efficacy, or our stem cell snake oil, or our stem cell pseudoscience. It's difficult for people to make these distinctions. It may be, if you're a stem cell researcher, it's pretty easy, but that's not true for everyone. And I would add that, when it comes to these misrepresentations, it's not always about the stem cells themselves. I mean, sometimes it's making really disparaging, misleading, inaccurate assertions about regulatory bodies like the FDA or state medical boards. And I think that can, again, undermine the kind of public conversations we can have, like about the FDA, for example, and how it's not just some sort of barrier or impediment, but it can also play an important role in terms of protecting patient safety, promoting public health, making sure people do get access to safe and effective stem cell products. Another detail that I would add is just that I suspect this marketplace, because of how large it is, because of how many people are pulled into it, probably has a harmful effect on the actual conduct of careful, credible stem cell research. If you think about individuals who can get access to what they believe is an effective stem cell treatment now, why is that person going to agree to be a participant in a randomized control trial where they may get a placebo, they may get a sham surgical intervention? That may not be so compelling if you really think that you want access to what you believe to be a stem cell treatment. This can make the actual conduct of clinical trials quite challenging. And as those of you who are clinician scientists know, trial recruitment and accrual can be really challenging. So when you lose individuals who could be in studies into these direct-to-consumer marketplaces, you can lose important components of research, human beings who have health problems that you want to study and develop therapies for them. So I think this is a broader collective harm. Again, on the subject of collective harms, the pandemic is not over, and there were and are still businesses that are using stem cells to market purported stem cell treatments for COVID-19. The branding, the advertising pops up in different ways. Stem cell immune boosters, preventive interventions, treatments for long COVID, but certainly a small part of this marketplace has decided to take advantage of the pandemic and, again, make stem cell representations related to COVID-19. I'm going to very quickly, I want to make sure there's time for questions and discussion, but let me just move away from some of the ethical issues, the harms, the consequence of this marketplace, to give you a bit of insight into, what have some of the responses been? Well, from the scientific community, including, International Society for Stem Cell Research, International Society for Cell and Gene Therapy, and other organizations. Part of it is that there's been a kind of patient education, public education approach, put out brochures, handbooks, Q&A material to try and help people understand a bit about what stem cell therapies are, about what clinical research is, the challenges of conducting clinical research, how to spot red flags. I think that kind of approach is valuable and informative, but I also think that, we don't want to just say buyer beware. We'll give people some useful information and let them navigate the marketplace, because it's just too difficult to do that. So I think we need to see the value of these efforts, but also understand that that certainly can't be the only response. Put out a PDF page and then leave people on their own. Some of you may have seen today's Los Angeles Times piece by Michael Hiltzik, where he points out that, at one business, StemGenics in La Jolla, California, There's been a settlement of the class action lawsuit that was brought against that business, and now over 1,000 ex-patients will collectively receive, once the legal fees are pulled out, a $3.65 million settlement. So this is an interesting example of not just an individual lawsuit, but a class action lawsuit against one of these businesses. So I'm mentioning this just to say that when we think about responses, I'm going to talk about regulators, but there is the civil litigation side to it as well, where victims have sometimes managed to successfully, negotiate settlements, get something, maybe get part of their money back, all of their money back, get relief for harm in some way. The FDA, I think, has done a good job in terms of putting out guidance documents and clarifying how the FDA interprets laws and regulations, and has done a good job of addressing whatever ambiguities and uncertainties exist. They have also issued a number of permanent injunctions and warning letters and untitled letters to various clinics. The one on the left here is in Florida. The one on the right is part of a chain that began here in California and then went nationwide, a kind of McDonald's franchise of stem cell clinics that is now the subject of a permanent injunction action in a California federal court. The FTC has played a role as well. That material on the left has to do with two businesses operated by a single California-based physician here in Orange County, where I'm sitting. The one on the right is an ongoing action where the Georgia Attorney General and the U.S. Federal Trade Commission are working together in response to again, a chain of clinics that's operating out of Georgia. I think there's more that the FTC could do, but I also think it's important to acknowledge what they have done and not mention here are a number of letters that the FTC and the FDA have issued together in response to businesses marketing purported stem cell treatments for COVID-19. States Attorney General's offices have also stepped up their game. And so here's an example of where the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, ended up securing a $5.1 million court judgment against Park Avenue Stem Cell. So this is a business that was based in New York State. And there are other examples of ongoing action being taken by state attorney general's offices in Iowa, for example, in Nebraska and Arkansas, where we don't know the outcome, but we know that attorney general's offices are taking action against businesses in their states. Medical boards have a role to play, obviously, and in some instances, they've taken disciplinary actions. This is Zanis Grekos. He ran a business in Florida and ended up having his medical license revoked by the medical board there. I don't think medical boards have done as much as they could have in this space. I don't think they've done as much as they should have, but they do sometimes take action. And I think perhaps more robust action might have a meaningful role as a deterrent effect in this marketplace. State legislatures, California included, have also taken some action. So California, for example, passed a small piece of state legislation where if you're a business in California and you're marketing non-FDA approved stem cell products, you have to give that information to your prospective clients. You have to disclose that to them. And so you can find some businesses in California that's on their website. They still sell it, but now they have to disclose that information, and there are fines that go along with that. Other states like Washington and Vermont have also passed legislation. The Washington one is quite like the California one. The Vermont has a bit of a different wrinkle to it, but there are these state legislatures that are realizing that there's a role that they can play. I'm just going to end here by saying I think there are actually many entities that have a meaningful role to play in terms of a problematic marketplace like this. The national regulators are probably most obvious, like the FDA and the FTC, the FBI. Some of these businesses are publicly traded, and so the Securities and Exchange Commission has sometimes played a role. State medical boards, I think there's a role that those of us who are at universities and academic medical centers can play in terms of addressing this topic, in terms of trying to help patients understand, promote public understanding, and also ensure that there are rigorous standards in our own institutions. And as you can see, there are a number of other entities, I think, that can also, and in many instances be responsive to this marketplace. And I'm just going to end by saying that many people will sometimes take, work that I and others have done and think that, well, we're calling for more regulations, more red tape, more bureaucracy. And that's actually not what I'm trying to argue for here. I think we need better market oversight. I think we need more robust regulatory enforcement. I'm actually not convinced that we need more regulations or more bureaucracy. I think we need a more effective response to the marketplace that we have to better protect patient safety, to better protect credible clinical research, to better protect public health. I'm not convinced that more laws and regulations will do that. But I do think that, if these businesses get a warning letter or an untitled letter and they don't have to cough up whatever profits they've made, if there's no consequences for individuals' medical licenses, if it's possible to make a lot of money and not really suffer any consequences from that activity, the practical effect can sometimes be to incentivize non-compliant activity. And so I think what we need, as I said, is better market oversight, more robust regulatory enforcement. It's not so much about more regulations, it's using existing regulations to do something meaningful with what I think of as a problematic marketplace that we need to better address. So I will stop there. If there are questions or responses, really interested in hearing what you think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leigh. I really enjoyed this very rich and detailed overview, and it's obvious that there's so many angles to this issue. We cannot only look at it from one specific, side, which most people would think of regulation being the main kind of like reason why these kind of businesses are thriving. But I think there's so many angles, as I said, to it, that, as you described, that lead us to the situation we are now, where you showed nicely how the number of clinics have maybe tripled in the last 4 or 5 years. I have a question or two, but maybe we can also give a chance to our attendees if they wish to ask questions. So yeah, Alan Wayne is asking, thank you for your important work in this area and the excellent and comprehensive presentation.
No question, only
okay.
accolades. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. Really important.
Glad to be
I don't
with
know
you today.
if you know Alan Wayne. Yeah, but Alan, you can also introduce yourself.
Let's not tie it up. But anyway, really interesting.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for making time to join us today. Really appreciate it. Good to meet you.
I have a question, Leigh. In ophthalmology, there are official clinical trials going on for stem cell research that are in, the early stages, and some of them are in later stages, including that at USC with Mark Humayun. So I think, it's really critical that we don't, blast all of stem cell research, but I really think you've done an excellent presentation of, outlining what is going on there. I mean, my next door neighbor just said, "Oh, I had stem cell on my knee," and I went, "What?" And so it really frightens me and scares me because it's so prevalent. And I agree, it's like you slap people on the hand, but that doesn't stop them. So, but I do think we should also note that there are viable clinical trials going on with stem cells.
Yeah, thanks for making that point. I mean, it is a really important point to make, and this is not to, everything I've said is not meant to be some sort of like broadside against everything to do with stem cells and stem cell research. Right. Far from it. I mean, I'm trying to focus on businesses that aren't doing that careful research. They're not taking that incremental kind of approach. But just going to plug in my laptop here. I realize it's unplugged. That's the focus. But you're quite right that it's the businesses that aren't doing that work that are the issue. But it's also important to understand and appreciate and value facilities that are doing that kind of work. And we don't want to confuse the two. So thank you for your comment. Yeah.
Hey, this is Tom Buchanan from the Kexico Medicine. I also enjoyed your presentation. I guess I'll ask a probably naive and fundamental question. Is all of this illegal because these are not FDA approved and it's just that the penalties aren't bad, or is this legal and it's just becomes illegal if you make false claims and the penalties aren't bad enough? But is this legal to do? Can anybody set up these stem cell clinics and just give them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that might seem like a simple question, that it actually would take a while to kind of really give a comprehensive and fair answer. But let me say, first of all, when on the advertising side of things, sure, I mean, businesses in the United States, you're supposed to engage in honest and truthful advertising. And so if you're making health claims, claiming to treat a disease, claiming to treat an injury, and you don't have scientific evidence supporting that, I mean, that's where the Federal Trade Commission, for example, can target a business for engaging in making false representations. So falsehoods in the marketplace matter, whether you're selling dietary supplements or aromatherapy or whatever. All of that matters. Then again, I mean, an extraordinary number of dishonest and inaccurate marketing claims are made all over the place, and the FTC can only deal with a small amount. And if you talk to FTC officials, I mean, they really have to prioritize and pick the most egregious ones because they don't have the resources to deal with this enormous marketplace of dishonest marketing claims, stem cells, and far beyond. When it comes to stem cell products, most of them, it's clear that they have to be studied in the United States within the context of clinical trials done under investigational new drug applications submitted to the FDA. So you're going to, you're going to CBER inside the FDA. You're also going to maybe 1 IRB or 10 IRBs or 20, doing your studies under IRB approval and FDA clearance. And most of the stem cell products that we talk about, they would fall in that category. Now, I think, minimally manipulated homologous autologous bone marrow aspirate is this category where, if we were really spend the entire time here talking about, regulatory classification, there does seem to be some disagreement in terms of how the FDA interprets law in that space. You can find claims made on the part of the FDA in terms of orthobiologics, where they insist that there are no FDA-approved orthobiologic products. They'll emphasize that there are no FDA-approved stem cell products for orthopedic indications. Now, the documents that I've seen from the FDA suggest that they see homologous use on the part of bone marrow aspirate basically being hematopoietic reconstitution. But people who run ortho clinics and sports medicine clinics will make the argument that their product falls in this kind of regulatory carve-out. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's a kind of an accurate representation of how the FDA interprets federal regulations. But that is an example of the most commercial activity does take place, by numbers, the most commercial activity takes place in that space. And in part, I think those businesses are responding to a regulatory exception where, if you're marketing a product that it's autologous, it's minimally manipulated, it's homologous, it doesn't pose additional risks to individuals, then if you fall into that category, you don't need an IND, you don't need a biologics license. So I think that's an example of where, if we had 10 regulatory specialists, we might find some disagreement in terms of how the law should be interpreted there. But when it comes to fat-derived stem cells, where you're taking fat from someone and you're digesting it and you're processing it and you're putting it back in, the FDA is pretty clear that doesn't constitute minimal manipulation. You need an IND to do that. If you're taking, umbilical cord products and claiming to treat Alzheimer's disease, which again, businesses will say, oh, well, that's, that's compliant. The FDA will say, you can look quite a few warning letters and see that's clearly not the case.
I don't understand why. I mean, blood transfusions are minimally manipulated, but they have obviously strict regulatory requirements about quality assurance, et cetera, and regulatory controls. It's back to Tom's question. I just don't understand how this actually can be so rampant and not have regulatory oversight.
I mean, I think we have this weird context where if you're trying to do credible research and you're trying to do everything by the books, it's this very challenging undertaking. Like when we talk about research in ophthalmology and other areas, it's a burden. It's not a burden. That's not right the way. It's difficult. There's a lot to do, right, to actually meet FDA standards. So if you voluntarily come forward and you classify your stem cell product as it should be, you have to do your preclinical research, you have to do your phase 1 study and go on. And at each stage, you may not get to that next step. But it is extraordinary how you can just set up shop and basically keep operating until someone comes knocking on your door. And, the odds are good that an FDA inspector or FDA inspectors are never going to show up. And so, when it comes to treating, eye diseases, for example, I mean, I can think of businesses that have been operating in this space for years claiming to treat, individuals with vision loss suffer vision loss for a variety of reasons. And while some researchers are doing careful and rigorous work, other businesses are making claims about treating individuals suffering vision loss and making substantial amounts of money. And sometimes these are businesses, they've been the subject of investigative reporting, they've been the subject of complaints people have submitted to the FDA, and there still hasn't been any action. So to say, when you say you don't understand it, I have to say at some level, I don't understand it either, because you would think that if there are appropriate targets for regulatory action, those businesses would surely fall in that category.
Yeah, and if I add to Alan's and Tom's point, I think this is exactly the case. Like the FDA will not like add regulatory burdens when people doing blood transfusion, because historically it's known that, you know, like legitimate academic centers, you know, are doing this, and they don't want to, you know, add these regulatory, you know, levels to it. But then these businesses found this loophole, you know, this kind of like flexibility, and they start claiming that they can do the same. And by the time the FDA were catching up, because they don't have, you know, the resources as well to cover all these businesses and do proper action, I think they were thriving and thriving. I believe this might be also what happened. I think we have a question here from Nadia, a very important one. I know the answer to, but I will not say it. But okay. Nadia, maybe you can say it out loud.
Hi, everyone. This is Nadia. So yeah, so I was wondering if there's any sort of consolidated resource where patients could look up if a clinic or, you know, business was selling any unapproved or you know, illegitimate therapies. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say, I'm not sure how you would answer it. I mean, I would say the answer is no, that if you want the opposite, you know, if you want to go on the FDA's website and find cell and gene therapy products that have been approved and have been licensed, there's a list that you can go to on the FDA's website. If you want to find the opposite, businesses that are selling ones that they don't have a license, they're not evidence-based. I mean, that 2016 piece that I mentioned had a database that went with it. So, I mean, people could use that, but I mean, that's basically our characterization of the businesses that we found. We try and be pretty careful not to say that somehow we know that every one of these is non-compliant, in part because businesses can be quite threatening and intimidating. You know, Paul and I had to deal with that after our 2016 piece came out. And I would also say that, you know, an organization like the International Society for Stem Cell Research, they had an initiative at one point where they had this idea of, you know, if you have questions and concerns about a business, send us the name of that business. We will look into it. We'll look and see, do they have national approval from national regulator? Do they have IRB approval? You know, they would kind of take these steps. And they reportedly ended up basically being threatened by, you know, a lawyer or lawyers. So that exercise of trying to provide these kinds of organized resources tend to break down just because people who want to try and promote that sort of understanding and provide that information end up coming in, becoming the subject of legal threats.
Yeah, and it's oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it's such a pity because, you know, a lot of patients just don't even have that understanding of medicine and biology or regulatory compliance to even do that research on their own, right? So bummer. Yeah, thank you though.
Yeah, I mean, these businesses are good at what they do. I mean, they've often got, you know, it's a mistake to think that they've all got kind of like really crude, you know, websites with like red flags flying. I mean, they're often quite compelling websites, and it does require, you know, knowing quite a lot about the current state of stem cell research, regulations, to really be able to start to make sense of what exactly is going on there.
Yeah, so yeah, I was just going to add that there have been like, you know, a lot of people trying to compile such kind of database, but then because of the legal ramifications of such kind of list, they opt from doing that. So this is why it doesn't exist. But there are the work that you did and others that they can maybe look into or like to, but patient wouldn't have access to that. This is what I think Nadia's point, which is a good one. So we have two last questions, and I think we're in the last minute.
Okay.
Valeria, maybe you wish to communicate your questions with us? Okay, if not, then are these patients receiving these stem cell treatments that might develop teratomas? And is there any evidence that any of these treatments are effective?
Yeah. So Valerie, thanks for those questions. I mean, we do have these case studies and case reports. We've got some information about the kinds of serious adverse events that occur. There have been instances where people have undergone purported stem cell procedures and then end up with these, sort of cellular masses, cells that are the wrong kind of cells in the wrong place. And so, I think we could probably say fall into that category, at least cellular masses, if not teratomas. But the harms, the outcomes seem to be there are different kinds of things that people can suffer when they go to these facilities. It can be, as I said, it can be vision loss, it can be a pulmonary embolism, it can be infections. So it seems as though there could be a number of different outcomes. There's a case, but just to sort of think about your first question in terms of teratomas. I mean, there's a well-known case involving an individual, Jim Gass, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and that's probably the best example that I could think of. Not the only example, but a fairly recent one, where someone ended up going to more than one clinic, having more than one procedure, and then ended up having this quite painful mass that ended up having to be treated with radiation. And otherwise cared for. So I would say that, yes, that does fall in terms of the broader sweep of adverse events or harmful outcomes that can occur. That question in terms of, is there any evidence that any of these treatments are effective? I mean, this is sort of like where it starts getting into much more challenging questions about, like, well, what constitutes any evidence, and what constitutes meaningful evidence? What constitutes convincing evidence? I mean, I'm actually, I would say cautiously optimistic that we're going to have at some point stem cell therapies for a number of the conditions that have been mentioned in today's presentation. I'm not in any way dismissive of the idea that it's possible to develop stem cell therapies to relieve pain, for example, or to treat individuals suffering from vision loss. The problem is right now that, these businesses, I would say that they're not themselves bringing meaningful evidence to the table. They don't have phase 3 trials with convincing evidence of efficacy. They don't have biologics license. They don't have robust data for the most part. They may have a link on their website where they're referring to someone else's study, and it's a preclinical study or it's a phase 1 study. They may refer to studies that are taking place around the world. There are not that many of these businesses that are actually contributing to scholarship themselves. Of those that are, some of it, I would say it's kind of coming up in what's known as junk journals or predatory journals, where they're basically trying to buy their way into the academic literature. And then there are some others where they're doing some work that I wouldn't be categorically dismissive of it, but I would also say that, this is not really rigorous, careful, well-designed, competently conducted, phase 3 randomized controlled trials. And so, when I think about really convincing evidence, I would say that for the most part, we're talking about businesses that have hopped into this marketplace and they don't have that evidence backing what they're pitching.
Leigh, thanks so much. I know we went over time, but thank you. Really, we appreciate it. I know we can spend another hour talking about this, but I think we all learned a lot of important lessons from your talk today. And I hope we will be, ambassadors to our patients and our relatives and colleagues to raise more awareness on this. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to see you again, and also great to have a chance to spend some time today with you and your colleagues. So again, really appreciate having a chance to be part of today's discussion.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.